Dear Dr. Amir Dossal, today we are facing something that the information technology is playing a critical role, because everyone, when we used to have a face-to-face meetings, but now we are using Zoom, and there is no travelings, and everyone is like trying to use more facilities of internet. But is it, and also now we are seeing that United Nations even last time, I think a week ago, started a campaign, pause before posting, because disinformation and the wrong information, it's becoming like, you know, usual things, and it's also very dangerous. What do you think about that?
Yes, the UN, by the way, is extremely focused on this. The issue of misinformation is causing great problems, especially for people in developing countries where they don't have proper broadband access. So they rely on, if you like, information from the internet. And the UN is saying, please be careful before you forward things. Please be careful before you utilize information. And they've started a campaign called Verified, which is aimed at people so that they can verify the information before they use it, before they forward it. COVID-19 has, of course, resulted in many different challenges, but it also has provided new opportunities to use the power of the internet and broadband technologies to learn more and to do more. Education and health, I would imagine, are probably the biggest beneficiaries of this process. Children are struggling, especially children from poorer communities do not have access to internet. So they are not able to study from home. Like we are working from home, children are struggling. If they don't have internet access, they can't study. So governments and local communities, local councils are trying to provide public Wi-Fi services. So like in New York City, in the urban areas, they're providing Wi-Fi facilities in communal areas so that children can go there and have access to the internet and learn about things.
Yesterday, we just published an article with a statement with Gordon Brown, former Prime Minister of United Kingdom. It was his initiative, but we just joined it. And there was like one very important point that for today, 1 billion children is out of school, out of education system. And there is a really big danger that a public health crisis like COVID-19 pandemic is going to create a COVID generation. And the COVID generation, which they are going to be out of schools and no possibilities for the future. But also, more than 400 million children are depending on the school meals, and now they are starving from the meal food security. And beside, I mean, like children, and especially they are more effective for this like crisis, like mental illness, and that's affecting very badly. What can be done? Like, you know, how it's possible, like, you know, United Nations is going to play an important, more active role, or international organizations or tech companies should be doing this, or the governments, because governments, they don't have, most of them, they don't have money.
Right, right. And this is a key point, by the way, because as you know, national budgets have now been utilized to fund the gaps which have resulted in COVID-19. And what the UN has been saying, and Secretary General Guterres is calling for global cooperation. He's pointed out that because governments don't have enough budgets, it is all the more important that we have new, innovative public-private partnerships. The private sector has a critical role to play. Because we don't want to create, and it's starting to create that big gap between the haves and have-not. Those who have the funding, those who have the money, are progressing very well. You look at the global markets. Global markets are going up and up, while the economy is sliding down. even in the US, there is 10% plus unemployment here. And the unemployment is structural unemployment amongst the poor. You know, the way children used to go to libraries, now we have to have virtual libraries. And teachers have to be more engaged to ensure that the mental health of children is not impacted. And you made a very good point about school meals. That has been a challenge even for major urban areas. Even New York City is struggling because there is that dichotomy of trying to reopen schools so that children can attend schools, get proper nutrition, their daily meals, for example, learn and study. At the same time, there is concern that when they come into the schools, they run the risk of catching COVID-19. Yeah. And what we hope is that as a result of better precaution and careful monitoring of children, and of course we're now at that stage where we are saying we cannot have all the children back at school because that could run the risk of spreading the pandemic. So they're starting to reopen bit by bit, some virtual, some physical.
Yeah, but some countries, they are trying to use an experience like one group of children to come, like, you know, in the morning sessions, and some Muslims to come to the evening sessions.
Exactly.
That's really important point. But what do you think, like, you know, about the role of United Nations? Because there is lots of critics on how United Nations been involved or acted during the COVID-19. Definitely, we have to admit one thing, that member states didn't empower Guterres, Secretary General, to have more power and to act something. It's just only, like, you know, these endless meetings and Security Council meetings, which is, like, you know, never ends with a positive decision. And that's a way, like, but there is lots of negotiations and discussions that there should be something to be changed in the United Nations system as well.
So, you know, the challenge with the United Nations is that it is a representative of all the member states. So the UN and the Secretary General gets his mandate from governments, gets the funding from governments. So it's where they kind of put the emphasis on is where he can implement. But he still remains the voice for the voiceless, basically, for the underprivileged. And he has been constantly at it. Secretary General Guterres, way back in March, issued a report on the COVID-19 response, and then he created a COVID-19 recovery fund, and started with supporting the World Health Organization, and now this recovery is to help children, people who are unwell, people who are kind of immunocompromised, and so on. So the target is children, women, and people who are struggling. But at the end of the day, we really need to have if you like, a new Marshall Plan, a global Marshall Plan to address this. And to address it means new funding. So UN, the World Bank, IMF, OECD, and other bilateral donors are starting to do something.
Yeah.
But they can only do so much, unfortunately. So UN remains, it's kind of a bully pulpit, a megaphone to highlight some of the gaps. But to do it, you need governments and the private sector to come together.
I agree. Dr. Dossal, like, two last questions. One is, how do you see, like, you know, because COVID is changed, because you are one of the key persons on international relations, on international organizations, public partnership. What do you think about, like, you know, how is the role of international organizations are going to change? Because most of the organizations used to have, like, you know, face-to-face meeting, like think tanks and so on, but now everything is closed up, and the new realities is changing. How do you see that it's going to change? And also, what do you think the role of information technology is going to be with COVID-19 and after COVID-19?
Right. I think that's a critical point here. My view is that we are now in a period of kind of holding pattern. I suspect, and even though people are kind of relying on the vaccine, that by early next year we will have a vaccine. But the reality is that vaccine will not be distributed until 2022. And that too, it depends on the efficacy of the vaccine. The US medical advisor, for example, Dr. Fauci has said, if we get 50% efficacy, I think we're doing well. Well, 50% is very low. But the bottom line is, if you look back into the history of pandemics and look at the history of other diseases, even like the flu vaccine is only effective between 40 and 60% of the time. So there is a situation where we might end up having to wait for a few years before people feel comfortable. There are many people who will say, I will not take the vaccine because I don't know what the after effects is. So you're absolutely right. The UN has to be agile and responsive to the day to be able to provide that kind of much needed assistance. So side by side, while people are developing the vaccine, UN needs to provide that capacity, infrastructure building for developing countries. I'm afraid I'm not that optimistic that things will change in the next couple of years. I think we're talking about 5 years before we have the acceptance of antibodies, herd immunity, testing everybody, vaccinating as many people as we can. But I'm also confident that in 5 years' time, we will start coming back to the full normal. It might be a slightly new normal, where we'll be using ICTs, broadband, and other technologies. A recent survey said that it is quite likely that 25% of the people who normally go to work, go to offices, will be working from home in the future. So those requirements are starting to change, where home becomes the office.
Yeah.
The office becomes a limited visiting area, for example. So those dynamics will absolutely have an impact. But UN will not be able to operate without face-to-face. Unfortunately, this year, the UN General Assembly meeting will be all, as you know.
Yes. But that's all right, because yeah, we have to adapt to new challenges and new realities, like what you said. The interesting part is that most of the organizations and think tanks are realizing that there is no need anymore to rent a big offices and to spend so much money, and most of the things can be done from the home, cheaper and more efficient. But how do you vision the role of information technology after the COVID-19? And because it's too early to talk about after COVID-19, but post-COVID era, because they are getting more and more influence on everyone, because our lives can't be visible. Like, you know, if today internet will cut down, all international organizations will be like, you know, useless. No one is going to work on. But how they are going to proceed and what's the realities with them?
Yeah, so you probably know that I'm a member of the Broadband Commission for Sustainable Development. And our mission has been solely focused on providing broadband access to the poor. And we're looking at ways of how to accelerate progress on this. Our approach has been, let's not wait for the big ticket items. Let's start small, in whichever community we can make a difference. And not only use broadband, but use wireless, for example. Things where technologies are now starting to take over is water management, for example, health. You know, telemedicine has taken off in a big way. Yet, you have a need for physical presence. Dentists, for example, cannot do telemedicine. You need to go to the dentist physically. But the dentists are starting to say, okay, how can I actually use the power of new technologies to address my patients? The reality is dentists are also starting to lose revenues. They're not opening up their dental practices. Medical practices, in a number of cases, are finding that a quick video conference with a patient can help address some of the issues. So our approach has been, let's get the private sector to take the lead, and let's have, for example, governments open up spectrum so that broadband access can be made available quickly. And that's starting to happen. In some developing countries, they're allowing new spectrum for big telecom companies. So we have the likes of Verizon, AT&T, Huawei, Nokia, etc., saying, we will provide that broadband access, but we need the ability to be agile. What we are saying at the Broadband Commission, look at it from a social good perspective as well. Not just economic bottom line, but a social bottom line. And therefore, the issue of ESG, economic, social, and governance kicks in even more so. Now that has reached top of the agenda for many companies. And I'm pleased to see that even Wall Street is starting to look at it to say, how can we look and help for the wider society, not just the shareholders, but the community at large. And our goal is to provide that enabling environment. So we bridge the gap between governments, information technology ministries, for example, and the private sector.
Perfect. Thank you so much. It was really very